So welcome everybody to the March 2018 SFDUG meeting. So we've got a couple of great presentations. I'm going to try and, we're running a little late here, so I'm going to try and zip through this. So you can always sign up to our monthly announcements at sfdug.org. Today we have both Danny Bentley here from SOM in San Francisco and Paul Winter out in Sydney. So very grateful to have both of them speaking tonight. And hopefully you can all see this here. So a couple of quick announcements. There's a new interesting resource. Thank God it's computational, so tgic.io. Lots of cool stuff. You can sign up, and another way to get kind of involved in what's happening all over the world. In addition to the previous machine learning and deep learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, lectures that we've been attending, some of which are ongoing, especially up at Berkeley. Another one that's coming up here is this Christoph from ETH Zurich is going to be coming in about a little less than a month, 3 weeks, up at the architectural building, Worcester Hall. So it's free. It's in just right inside the front doors to the left if you're going through the main entrance. And additionally, so I don't know if everybody's familiar, but you know, Mustafa and Chris and everybody over there. There's Grasshopper and he's presented as well here. The sort of both the Grasshopper work and the Dynamo plugins for Ladybug, Honeybee, and Butterfly. So Butterfly is a sort of similarly open foam CFD plugin that they've built. So there's an upcoming workshop series, or actually, excuse me, you can now pop into it at this link. So really cool stuff there. And about a week after, so basically a month from now, after that next ETH Zurich Christoph's lecture up at Berkeley, we have Randy presenting from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and then the following month will be Daniel Seagraves from TT. So again, as always, much thanks to our generous sponsors here at AISF and everybody over here for helping us set up every week and hosting us, and HOK and Gensler and Ideate for the food and the microphone, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Danny here, and we're going to get started into what's been happening at that previous AEC Hackathon that we mentioned last time.
All right, sounds great. All right, welcome everybody. So my name's Danny Bentley, and I work at Skidmore Owing and Merrill as a structural BIM designer. But I'm also an AEC technology enthusiast, so I was really excited to be able to attend the AEC Hackathon at the end of February in Oakland. So some of you may not know what a hackathon is. So a hackathon is a place where teams try to solve a problem, and they're given a limited amount of time to create a prototype and do a presentation. The participants, they're all encouraged to form teams and also work with people who might not be in the same discipline as them. So the AEC Hackathon is a theme-styled hackathon. And it's completely devoted to the design, the construction, and the maintenance of buildings. They use cutting-edge technology, which is provided by the sponsor, the supporters, and even the participants will bring in technology. The sponsors provide help, and they also raffle off prizes. I think throughout the weekend, DeWalt raffled off, a bunch of power tools. I actually didn't win anything, but I'm still gonna do a recap of it. So the first team to present was DIY Doxel, and this team was trying to accomplish something that a startup is doing here in the Valley. How many of you have heard of Doxel? Most of you, some of you? Okay, so Doxel is a startup who is using autonomous vehicles to scan the construction site every night with LiDAR. So the team over the weekend tried to build something more economical. So what they did was they had a autonomous vehicle with a Matterport scanner mounted on the top, and they placed beacons on one end to the other end so that the autonomous vehicle could travel down the same path and scan the building every night. And they actually did this pretty successfully. The path was within millimeters of what it really needed to be. So machine learning for architecture. Machine learning for architecture is trying to solve a problem where, high-rise buildings and tall buildings have become kind of a global form and have really lost their identity of the region. So what they're trying to do with machine learning is to learn if they can classify buildings in order to be able to kind of give back the identity of the region. So the way you would do it is you would put in 3D models into kind of a machine learning algorithm as a training set. And then you would put in your building and into the machine learning algorithm, and it would be able to weigh out how close you are to designing to that region of the country. The other part of that would be maybe beneficial to architecture is if it was a design assistant. So if you were working in a region, the machine learning algorithm would be able to supply you with forms of that region in the shape of contours that then you could take into Rhino or something and start developing your building. So the team Flying Bunnies was a team from 3DR, and they were trying to solve a problem that they actually have. They have a professional app that they use to be able to map the path of a drone over a site. And the problem with satellite imaging is that you can't see depth. So sometimes trying to fly around towers and different construction site equipment could be real difficult. So the idea was for them to put together an AR application, integrate it into their professional app, and then be able to have the pilot put a path over the construction site and have the drone fly along the path and be able to take snapshots of it. They use GPS waypoints, the Apple AR kit to develop this. And from what they said, I think this is something that they're hoping to integrate into their professional application after the hackathon. So Builder Block, using blockchain technology. So Builder Block is trying to solve the slow payment, the procurement, and the approval process by using blockchain. So they used a open source SDK of Hyperledger in order to use the blockchain, and it gives you very basic JSON style scripting back to you. The blockchain technology is nothing more than a ledger. And the ledger is able to hold on to all the records of the past, so things can be a lot more transparent and people can look back through the ledger and be able to see payment, approval. So the idea was to keep the blockchain in the middle of all of these individuals that are working on this massive, construction site, or, the owner plus the architect. So the team that I was actually on was named Laser Sharks, and it had two pieces to it. It had an IoT data collection side and a Revit visualization AR side. So the first one was the IoT data collection side. So the problem is that the computational fluid dynamic, or the CFD model, sometimes it's not as accurate as we think it is. So what they wanted to do was test it against real life, information or data. So they wanted to validate it. So what they did over the course of the weekend was they soldered and built, using a Raspberry Pi and some cheap sensors, a stick where they were able to go onto the field of where we were and be able to take data into that, and then transform that into kind of and bring it into Grasshopper with a Grasshopper, or bring it into Rhino using a Grasshopper script that then we were able to take the Revit metadata and the IoT data and upload it to the cloud for visualization. So it was kind of, the idea was to have all the data living in one central spot, and be able to be pulled down onto Unity and be able to be visualized with the metadata headset. So it had a lot of kind of different components to it, and the idea was that anybody can visualize this Revit model on the web, or through a headset. We had a teammate who was in Italy, and he was able to develop, or not, he was able to kind of do some screenshots of him actually working with the Revit model that we uploaded onto the Forge AR toolkit. And the one thing that the Forge AR toolkit does is that it holds the Revit metadata into Unity, which is kind of what was really important for us. So Team Mitra was trying to figure out how to build a great team. And the idea was that how do you build a great team, and how do you measure success? Is what the owner believes is a successful project isn't always what the architect and contractor believe is a successful project. So their idea was to build an application or an app that would be able to assist an owner to find or to build a team that would work well with the solution, or with the building that he was working with. The idea would be to put in an algorithm and use filters to be able to look up these different different success types. And one idea was that this would give the owner the ability to work with new talent instead of always working with the same people. So the team Space Note was from Star City, and they were trying to figure out how to put information into a building without using the BIM model. And they kind of came up with a solution of being able to use a AR scan of the building, and they used an open source SDK called Place Notes. And the idea was that you would come in as an architect and be able to put notes about your building that later people could walk through and be able to read information that the building might hold. But it also might be community driven. So if somebody had an idea or had found something interesting about that building, would be able to place a note, and the next person that would come would be able to read it, or interesting information that they had, how things work. So they used a user ID and this mesh that the AR kit built, but they had kind of a difficulty with the fact that if something moved in that mesh, then the location wouldn't be able to be found, or the note wouldn't be able to be found. So they suggested that if they had a bit more time, that maybe integrating a GPS location would work. And this is something that I think they may still pursue, as their company takes existing buildings and then remodels them for living space. So anyways, that was kind of a quick recap of just the build, just the projects that were there. Hopefully some people that haven't gone will be interested in joining the next one. There's one coming at the end of the year in November. It'll be through the 9th through the 11th. And I suggest anybody who wants to join, you can go and participate as much as you'd like. You can build a team, really do something. You can show up and see what other people are doing, and also the presentations are. You can show up to the presentations without registering or anything. I think they're open to the public at the very last day. So, anyways, that's about it. All right. Yeah. So the teams have to start. So it's all done over a weekend, and the first night teams, the participants show up and they build a team. Some people may have already kind of started building their team, but then the full Saturday you just start your production or building whatever you're intending to build, and then on Sunday you work up till the last minute, and it seems like everybody's trying to pull together a presentation to meet a deadline of, I think it was like 4 or 5 o'clock, when everybody pencils down and everybody presented. So it's quite quick. Some of the ideas seemed like they built off of other ideas or past projects. Some teams had done something previously and then come back and maybe built on it. So yeah, hopefully that answered. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, I have to say I wasn't part of that team, so I may not be completely able to answer for them. But from what I listened to during their presentation, the idea was that it would be a phone application, kind of using augmented reality. So it needed to be kind of lightweight. So they knew that the BIM model has just an enormous amount of information in it, but they wanted something lightweight that you could pull out of your phone and that everybody could use, that you wouldn't have to necessarily be a contractor or an architect looking at the building, that you could be part of somebody who is living there and be able to walk through and take your phone out and be able to read a comment from the architect or even from the community. So it's just, I think, for the purpose of being light on the phone. Yeah. All right. Good. All right. All right, great. Thank you.
Really quickly, I'm just curious, the team that you were on, are you guys kind of taking this forward?
Well, I think the one thing that I've always learned is that it's extremely fun to learn what's there, and especially because the Forge team was present, that you can actually get down there and ask them questions. So at SOM, I think there's a lot of talk of using VR and AR, and we're still trying to debate on how to use it. And I think pulling stuff off the web onto Unity might be helpful. So I know the HOK is also looking into AR, VR. So it might not be something that we all do together, but I think we're all still pursuing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Super interesting. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And wait. And now I'm going to switch it over to Paul. And
well, firstly, thanks very much for having me, and thanks for the organisers for organising the event. I'm going to be talking today about everyday Dynamo, and we're going to go through a few examples using Dynamo Player, which we'll be doing some live examples, and I'm doing it off Wi-Fi and presenting it remotely, so it's probably the most riskiest presentation technique possible. But before we get into that, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. So I'm the founder of a company called Parametric Monkey. This has been going for around 3.5 years now, and it started off as an initiative to boost the computational literacy within the architectural profession. And just over a month ago, I launched this as a design consultancy. So we offer these services, primarily focused around BIM, computational design, and digital fabrication. So in terms of today, I mean, I know this is a Dynamo user group, but I wanted to start with sort of why I use Dynamo and why I've sort of created the scripts that I have. And with the risk of sounding controversial, for me, it's not just about BIM. It's about creating better buildings, communities, and environments. And I find this point really important because a lot of the BIM presentations that I see at sort of various conferences, we tend to talk a lot about BIM and data and what it does and the potential. But it rests solely in sort of the technical world. And for me, it's about how can that technology enable us to do what we actually got into this profession to do, which is create better buildings and communities and environments. So
let's connect. This is a speaker? Or
so if we think about an architect, and there's a well-known I guess saying which says that the architect only spends about 5% of their time actually designing buildings, and I think that is pretty accurate. So what are we actually doing for the other 95% of our time? Now, we can make jokes about architects, adjusting their bow ties or getting lots of coffee. But the reality is that we're spending a lot of that time dealing with data. So when BIM emerged, and, Revit's now, 17 or 18 years old, it's almost old enough to drink. We were promised the notion that it would speed up our workflow and enable us to spend more time on what we enjoy, which is designing at the front end. of a project. Now, from what I've seen, the reality is projects don't actually get any faster, or we don't actually spend more time designing. We actually end up spending more time embedding more data into the model. So the same way that, you know, the iPhone or the computer was meant to make our lives much easier and happier, you know, we're still working just as long, but we're just being more productive. So this talk is really about if we're spending, say, 5% on geometry or the concept design, and the rest of the time is project management or documentation, is how do we get the most bang for our buck, and where can we invest our time to sort of reap the greatest rewards. So geometry is highly project specific, and there are a lot of really great presentations out there, you know, which talk about panelization or automation of, you know, form finding, etc. But that only applies to, say, a very few number of people in the industry, and it only happens for a short period of time. If we look at data, there's a whole bunch of, let's say, procedures that architects or engineers or other AEC professionals have to go through on a day-to-day basis, which is ripe for automation. So we can look at workset creation when you're creating your central model, assigning elements to that workset, having isolated workset views so you can start to monitor the team and how they're actually, you know, are they following the rules as to which element should go on which workset. Creating sheets. This is, I think, one of the most popular discussions on the Dynamo BIM forum. And today we're going to look at how to create a blank sheet as opposed to how to create a sheet and then assign a view to it. Modifying title block parameters. So whether that's north point or scale bars, how we can start to automate that. Getting some consistency in how views are named, you know, uppercase, lowercase, camel case, etc. Filters, which is a massive bugbear for me, and we'll come to that later. View templates, room locations, renumbering rooms, renaming model groups. So the example that I'm going to show today was this project, and this is a bit of a guinea pig. The scripts weren't created for this project, but I thought that this is a good size building to sort of, you know, put it through its paces. So it's a residential building in Sydney, designed by BVN Architecture, which is where I worked prior to this. It's a 20-story residential building, or condos as they're probably called over there. It's about 200 apartments, 20 stories. So if we think about how long all of those tasks would take to do manually, you know, you're probably looking at days, you know, a week, maybe longer. So using Dynamo Player, I've started to list out the times of how long it takes to do each task. So we should be able to get through all of this in well under 45 minutes. You know, much less, probably more like 20 minutes. So work sets, there's 5 of them, takes 8 seconds. The longest part of that process is actually initializing work sets. So, you know, turning it into a central model, which takes almost 4 minutes. Elements on work sets is by far the longest, and that's 6.5 minutes. And then everything else is just a couple of seconds to run all of these tasks. So the idea behind this is that we set up a central library, a repository, and teams, within the same studio or across multiple studios in different cities. There's a consistency to how they document. And that was sort of a big problem that we were facing with sort of local discrepancies in terms of skill levels and also documentation standards. So Dynamo Player was released with Revit 2017.2. The issue with that was that the script needed to run without any intervention. So you couldn't have any inputs to say, select this item or, adjust the prefix or whatever it may be. That came with Revit 2018. So we can have the script, but we have the added flexibility of adjusting the inputs. So I really see that this hasn't reached its full potential yet. Imagining more sort of like in 6 months' time. Revit 2018 is still pretty new. Some offices haven't upgraded yet, or if they have deployed it, not all projects are going to be upgraded straight away. Generally that happens at key milestones or, as per what the contract stipulates. So I think we're going to see over the next sort of 6 months a much greater uptake of Dynamo Player. And then I think the floodgates will, be open and Dynamo will become much more ubiquitous. You can't really sort these. You sort of need to do prefixes. So it's still a bit of a, if you've got 10 scripts, it's sort of manageable. But if you're in, if you've got 20 or 30, then it might be a bit problematic. So I might just flick over to Revit. So this is the project, and I just want to kind of show you the current state, show you that there's nothing sort of hidden up my sleeves like a magician. I've enabled work sharing already. So we've got our standard workset 1 and shared levels and grids. Everything by default is going to be on workset 1. We have, if we go to a floor plan, we have a bunch of model groups which represent, the name represents the type of unit, so a 1-bedroom type 2 or a 2-bedroom type 1. Party walls are independent. We have a curtain wall for the exterior. So it's not a, let's say, a simplified model for the sakes of demonstration. Okay, so project setup. So the first thing we're going to do is create worksets. So the idea behind this, and I should mention that all of these components or nodes that I'm showing are from the BVN Dynamo package. I was the original author of those. Since leaving, it's now been sort of handed over to someone else in the office, but these are sort of freely available for anyone to download. So the idea behind this is that we have a fixed naming convention that will create all of your worksets for you. And then there's also the option of renaming the 2 default worksets. Now, this is a little bit controversial and I was a bit, it sounded a bit counterintuitive at first, but I've sort of warmed up to it. And the discussion went along the lines of workset 1 is always problematic. It can never be deleted. There's different trains of thought as to what to do with it. Do you just leave it blank and just, you know, hanging there like a neglected child, or do you rename it and use it? So the conclusion that we came to was that the one item that every model needed was a level or a grid. So actually what we might want to do is turn workset 1 into levels and grids, and turn the levels and grids workset into something else that we can use and delete. So we're sort of flipping the logic here a bit. So let's just open that up. So I've got Dynamo Player browsing to my library folder. I don't really need to modify the input, so I'm just going to hit play. Should take around 8 seconds. And down the bottom, I hope you can see, we now have all of our worksets created. So I found this really useful when you had a model that maybe had multiple buildings in it, which later got separated out into multiple models, and trying to have consistent workset naming across multiple models. You can't run this until work sharing has been enabled, so it's still let's say a hybrid or a semi-automated process. So the next thing I'm going to do is just do the elements on worksets, and I'm going to hit run on that and come back in a couple of minutes. So assigning elements to worksets. This is a highly, let's say, customized or office-specific node, but it can be easily customized to suit, you know, whatever your office standards are. So BVN had its standard workset naming convention around facade, structure, vertical circulation, etc. This node doesn't require any inputs. It just runs, and the way that it works is that it looks for categories. Now, there are a lot of categories in Revit, and the node doesn't cover all of them. So if it's not in one of these categories, it's going to remain on workset 1 or the shared levels and grids if we've inverted the naming convention. But what it's looking for is any element of the category ramp, stairs or railings. We're going to assign it to vertical circulation, rooms to interior, furniture to FF&E, you know, topography, entourage onto site. So that's all pretty standard. There's no real ambiguity as to which element belongs on which workset. So if we look inside that custom node, there's a code block input, which is searching for any workset named, you know, 50_site, and then it's assigning anything of category entourage, parking, planting, or topography to that workset. So if you wanted to make changes to this, you'd simply add or subtract some of those inputs in the list create, and then plug in different categories to group them accordingly. So where it gets a little bit more tricky is where an element could belong to any number of worksets, depending on a series of what-if scenarios. So the way that this is structured is for all walls, floors and roofs, if it's if it's structural, so if the instance parameter is ticked, it goes onto the structural workset. If it's non-structural, then there's another test done, and it tests the type properties to find out whether it's exterior or interior. And if it's exterior, it'll go to facade. If it's interior, it'll go to the interior workset. Model groups, generic models, it sort of depends on how the team has modeled and you know, the building typology. But this really needs to be defined manually, and it can get a little bit tricky. So if we look at model groups, for example, so I know that in this building we have probably 200 model groups representing the apartments. They've been documented in a way that the name has a 1B, 2B, or 3B prefix. So what I can do is return all the model groups, filter those out by any that start with either of those prefixes, and then assign them to a workset based on the name. So we can see here over on the right, I'm assigning all of those model groups to the 30_ interiors workset. So you might need to do multiple variations of this to pick up all the different model groups or generic models that you have. So while we're still waiting for, we still have about 1.5 minutes left before that script should have finished. Once we've assigned elements to worksets, I'm a strong advocate of creating isolated workset views. And the reason is, although Revit has the little button down the bottom which allows you to do work sharing display settings, there's kind of lots of issues with that. One, it's really slow for large models, and you also need to memorize the color scheme. So you need to know that red is the facade, and you know, that can be quite difficult, especially with lots of worksets. And then the other issue is because everything in the model is turned on, you can't necessarily see everything in the model that you need to see. So what we can do is run this view from worksets, which again is from the BVN Dynamo package. It has an optional view prefix, so you know, the naming convention might be 3D_, and then we have our Boolean toggle, which is activating a Python node within that, and that will generate all of those workset views with only the one workset visible. So if we go back to our Revit model, that script's now finished, and what we should see is we have this party wall. It's saying that it's on the facade workset, and if we go into the type, that's really because it's it has an exterior function, and the structural instance parameter hasn't been enabled. So it may or may not be on the correct workset, but the script's sort of done exactly what it's been told to do. So it might be that the team has to come in and you know, start to do some tweaks to that. The stair hasn't been picked up because it's in a model group. If we look at, let's say, some other elements, we should see that the room's been assigned to the interior, doors, depends if this has been an internal or an external, but it's being picked up in interiors. So hopefully the majority of this has been assigned to all of the correct work sets. So the next thing we're going to do really quick is we're going to assign the model groups to work sets. This should only take around a few seconds. Okay. Okay, so that's run. If we look at these now, we should see that all of those model groups are on the interior work set, which is exactly what we want. So moving forward, I'm just going to do the isolated work set views. This is taking about 20 seconds. It does take a bit of time, depending on how many sort of work sets you do. But once this is run, we should see it up in the project browser under the question marks. So if we come here, it's named it exactly the same as the work set. So if we go into our visibility graphics and look at work sets, all the others are hidden except for the one in question. So I find this a much quicker way of really quickly just scrolling through and saying, okay, you know, someone in the team's not, you know, putting toilets on the facade work set and sending it to the engineer when they don't need to. So that's all done. So if we jump forward, the next thing we're going to do is create blank sheets from Excel. So as I mentioned earlier, creating sheets is like a hot topic. People want to know how to do this. And a lot of the times we try to get a little bit too fancy, and we want to also assign views to that sheet straight away and have them numbered correctly, etc. In my experience, that is sort of a BIM unicorn. It doesn't happen that way. You know, people start modeling, you're doing your early design, and then at, you know, some stage later, the sheets are created, and, you know, unless you're doing a repetitive tower, which I guess, you know, you may or may not be doing in San Francisco, then there's going to be lots of variations and exceptions to the rule. So I find it's actually much easier to just create blank sheets and then let the team sort of assign the views to them. So what this is after, and it's not really I guess a custom node, it's sort of a script which is using the Steam nodes node called tool.createEmptySheet. And I think it's sort of quite an unknown node. So definitely check it out if you haven't already. But what it's after is the family type. So what's your title block? And then a file path for the Excel sheet. And it's going to read the first spreadsheet. So Excel, so we define the Excel worksheet name, which by default will be sheet 1. In this instance, we're having the sheet numbers in column 0 and the sheet names in column 1. And then we have the Steam nodes component. So if we open that up, and you can see here in our project, we actually have no sheets created at the moment. So this little icon here is where we can edit the inputs. So we can define our title block, and you can browse to your Excel document. So hopefully this is all set up okay. It opens up the sheet or our Excel document, and what we should see here now is a whole bunch of empty sheets already created for us. Okay, so the next element, and I don't know how many architects do this, or if I'm sort of a little bit pedantic, but is to look at modifying instance parameters on that title block. So what really bugs me is if I see a section or an elevation, and in the title block it has a north point. I don't know how that's sort of possible. So most companies will have a documentation system. You know, whether it's using letters or numbers, they'll start to group different drawing packages. So in this scenario, what we're saying is, okay, anything, it returns all the title blocks. It says, let's filter those title blocks based on the sheet number if it begins with, for example, A. So if A is our section or elevation series, then we have a yes or no instance parameter controlling our north point, or project north, true north, and a scale bar options. So if we look at our title block, we can see up here we have some properties where we can turn on and off our north points, etc. So what we're going to do is, you know, because potentially we have a large number of drawings in that set, is we're going to use Dynamo. So if we look at our instance parameters, this is one of the, I guess, the strange things that you need to think about with Dynamo Player is that you sort of need to rename the node so that when you're in Dynamo Player, you actually know what it means, rather than just a Boolean true or false. But here we can see that it's going to look for any sheets beginning with the letter B, which is fine. So 2 seconds and we're done. And if we go to now any of our B series drawings and we select I'm sorry. And we select our title block, we should see that they've been deactivated, and hopefully on all of the others they're still there and enabled. So when you're writing these scripts, one of the things to keep in mind is someone may have previously run this script. So just because this says B doesn't mean that someone hasn't already run this with A enabled. So sometimes you might want to embed into the script a reset procedure where maybe it turns everything on or off, and then you go back and isolate just the ones that you want again. But it really depends again on each situation. View names to uppercase. So again, this is another sort of bugbear. You know, you get your recent graduates coming in and sort of just getting the job done, and it just looks messy. It's not necessarily do or die, but what we want to be able to do is have consistency. So this is one way that we can do it without having to rely on BIM link and export it to Excel. So I've actually bundled in 3 separate custom nodes here, views, sheets, and schedules. So rather than just doing them all, you may want to run them in batches. So you can see here I've deliberately made these all sort of camel case, and all our views are lowercase, apart from the new views that we've just created. So I don't need to run that again. So I've separated those out. So we do sheet names to uppercase. So we should see that they're all done now. Schedule names to uppercase. They're done. And view name to uppercase. Okay. So they're all good to go as well. So the next step is to look at really the documentation or the ongoing model management. So the first part was really about just getting the model set up and ready for the team to sort of, I guess, come in and pollute it. So the next step is, once that's been polluted, is how to sort of restore it back to a healthy state. So one of the things around that is deleting unused filters. And this came from sort of personal experience where working with someone in a team who was really trigger happy with creating filters. We had hundreds of them, 300, 400 filters, and most of the time they weren't named very descriptively. I might say Paul's awesome perspective view, and then, final view, or something really silly like that. And so the issue is really about, there's no way to delete these manually in Revit in a logical way. So we can't use purge unused. And if we go into the filters dialog box and we delete it, it doesn't prompt you to say this is in use, warning, are you sure you want to delete it? We get that with view templates, but a filter, you have no way of really knowing if it's in use or not. So so we developed this custom node, which is get unused filters. And so that will return any filters which haven't been applied to a view. And then you've got a few options on, deleting those. So you can use the Steam node package, tool eraser, or the Archilab package is sort of delete elements. They work in a similar sort of way, and it's, up to you which one you would like to use. So if we go into our view filters, some of these I know are in use. Others I'm going to just create ones which I know aren't in use because I've just created it and I haven't assigned it yet to any views. I can come in and just run delete unused filters. And if we go back in, we see that we have much less, and I can see the one that I just created, TTT, is all gone, and we only have the essential ones that are created. So along a similar line, we can do delete unused view templates. This we can do manually in Revit, but it's quite a painstaking task. And this is actually from the Medelical Dynamo package, which is, they do some really good work, and if you don't have it installed, I really recommend it. And it's called Delete Unused View Templates. So let's just open that up. if we have a look at our view templates, let's just create one which isn't in use. We can run our Dynamo script, go back in, and something didn't work. What didn't work? Okay, that one needs a bit of attention. Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to blame Modelical for that one. Maybe I have an older or a newer package installed, but most of the time that works. So we've just got a couple more, and then we're almost done. So adjusting room center location. I'm not sure why Revit doesn't have a feature like this already, but if you're going to use the tag all command, it's going to tag an element, in particular a room, where the center of that is, where the crosshairs or the insertion point was. So ideally what we want to do is center the room first and then tag the element. So we have two nodes here that I've bundled together. So the room center location, it does it, as expected. So we have two outputs, rooms moved and rooms not moved. So if rooms not moved, if for example you have an L-shaped room and the centroid of that is actually outside the room itself, it's just going to keep the current position and just notify you saying that it actually hasn't moved. And then we have the move tag, and if the element has been tagged, it's just going to move it now to the new location. So let's have a look at that. If we go to one of our floor plans, I'll just move these off to the center, and I will just enable the room crosshairs or the reference, just to give us a bit of visual feedback when these rooms move. Okay, let's just do another one just to double check. And I'm going to move the tag as well, because obviously I've run this script before and it's looking too perfect. So room center location, let's go. So this should take around 45 seconds because there's actually quite a lot of rooms in this project. But once this is done, we're going to move on to renumbering rooms. And this is a eternal problem that, again, I'm not sure why Autodesk haven't already addressed. It's not unusual for an architect to have to number rooms, and I'm not sure why we don't have an out-of-the-box solution. So what we can see here is that room, now that it's finished, is in the center, and our room tag has followed to match that. Now, there are going to be situations where maybe the center isn't ideal and you want to start to align these, but this will get you most of the way automatically and sort of minimize any kind of manual tweaking that you want to do after it. So renumbering rooms, we can use a schedule to do this, or we could use BIM link. The problem with that is you need some sort of visual reference because in a schedule you don't know which room should be numbered in which way. So we can't do a simple, you know, pick a cell and drag and drop and change it. So the way that this is set up is I'm going to use a model line and I'm going to draw a spline. And so I can see here that the naming or the numbering convention is running clockwise from the top left. So let's mix it up and go from the bottom right. And you want to draw a spline pretty close to the center point of all of these rooms. So I'm just going to do the apartments to begin with. I'm not going to worry about the balconies, but it's only going to rename those rooms that are intersected by this model line. So circulation, the balconies, they're going to be excluded. And what we need to do is I'm just going to isolate that spline to make it a little bit easier to pick. And for this one, I am going to modify the inputs. So I'm on level 14, so I'm going to change the prefix to 14 dot. We have the precision here, so how many digits in that number, so the padding. So at the moment I'm just going to go with 2 and the starting number. So again, I should probably rename that node so it says starting number rather than number. So this means that you can actually run it in batches, whereby, you know, you might have a hospital, for example, and the east wing goes from 0 to 100, and then the west wing goes from 100 to 200, and you don't want to have this enormous spline snaking its way through every possible room. So all I need to do here is select the element. I'll turn back on our elements and hit play. And what we can see now is that it's using our prefix 14, it's starting at number 01, and it's renumbering all of those rooms along that spline. So the way that this works is it's picking up the insertion point of each of those rooms. So that's why we ran the previous script, which moves all of those insertional points to the center. And then it's finding the closest. Then it's finding the closest point along that spline. So that has what's called a T parameter. So if we think about any with any curve, a start point is equal to 0 T parameter and an end is equal to 1. It knows which room has which parameter, and so you can then sort those sequentially through the building. So what I would, to use this in a real project, what I would imagine would be the most convenient is to sort of draw all your splines, put them on a hidden work set, and inevitably when new rooms are added or subtracted, you've got your spline there ready to go. You can do a few easy manipulations and then rerun the script. So the final one is renaming rooms by model group. So if we have a look at the model here, there seems to be a bit of an eternal problem, particularly around residential buildings. And the issue is that you have a model group, which is appropriately named, 2-bed type 1, but then you have a separate element, which is the room, and those two elements should be in sync, but they're not. So ideally, the name of this should be 2-bed type 1, as opposed to just a generic apartment or room. So I've run a bit of a reset script, which just kind of randomizes the name parameter, the occupancy parameter of each of these rooms. And so this final one, rename rooms, it's basically going to get all of the model groups with those prefixes that we define. It's going to see where the insertion point is. So if you've grouped it and the insertion point is out here, it might be renaming the adjacent room and not the one that you need. So we need to make sure that that is at least within the model group. And then it's going to match it up with the room that it's in and modify the occupancy parameter. So let's run that and see how it goes. So I would imagine that this is also applicable for other typologies, hospitals or where maybe a lot of model groups are used. So you can see here, 2-bed type 1, it's got it in the name. This group actually has had members excluded from it. We can see from up here. There probably is a way that we can build into the script to remove any text that says members excluded. But actually this is a good sort of QA check to actually see if those elements were meant to be excluded or not. And unlike the previous script, this is going to do it throughout the entire building. So some scripts, there's always a balance between speed and manual sort of intervention. This one I want to run over the entire model. I don't want to have to run it level by level. Whereas the renumbering rooms, they're going to have different layouts and different requirements on a level by level basis. So we sort of want to be able to control that in a different way. So that's everything that I wanted to cover today. Hopefully that's been of interest, and more importantly, hopefully that is something that you can take back to your office and hopefully start to roll out, and collectively we start to improve the way that our industry works, and remove a lot of the inefficiencies and focus on the stuff that we actually like to do more of. So thank you for having me, and I'm not sure exactly how, if we can open up questions now or...
Hey, Paul, that was great. Thanks. I'm going to check online here to make sure. Cool. Thanks. So a lot of this stuff is essentially you've optimized just like essentially a lot of the QA/QC process.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I didn't sort of talk about is my background's a computational designer, and before working at sort of BVN, you know, I was doing a lot of stuff. I was sort of the Asia building smart manager at HOK, and you know, working on some pretty complex geometry projects. And then sort of coming, you know, back to Australia, there wasn't really the need for a lot of that knowledge. You know, there's only so many stadiums and Sydney opera houses that are getting built. And so I sort of redirected my efforts into how to sort of help the masses in the studio. And what I was seeing was, you know, a lot of inefficiencies, you know, people just spending way too long on doing stuff that they didn't need to do. And even using BIM link sort of proved a bit of a struggle. You know, there was just a few too many steps and sort of people were sort of worried. But I think Dynamo Player sort of opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities where there's no spaghetti, it's all packaged. Hopefully whoever wrote it designed it correctly, that it can't do, you know, irrevocable damage to your model. And so it just takes away the pressure from your team or project BIM manager. They don't get inundated with, let's say, you know, support requests, and rather they can be more proactive and, you know, do little guerrilla tutorial sessions or, you know, teach the rest of the team more advanced topics, and they're not having to fix up, you know, a lot of the crap that sort of builds up over time.
I don't know if you had called in. Maybe one of the things that I like about the Dynamo Player is, like, I mean, there are a lot of things I like about it, and sort of like Dynamo in general, allowing people to engage at different levels. But one thing that I was wondering is, do you think, to the one thing you'd mentioned at the beginning, like anything more than 10 sort of scripts in there, and it kind of becomes like a giant browser, and a little bit unwieldy. And so you have probably, what, 20 or something in there that you just presented, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was numbered up to 12, but there were a few duplicate prefixes to group them. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that Dynamo Player is still pretty new, and that the Dynamo team are hopefully, if they're listening, looking at, you know, developing that further, because I think it does need to be managed maybe a little bit better using sort of subfolders, or I'm not sure the solution. I mean, one comparison might be that I don't know, you know, if there's many people there using Unify for their content management, but you know, in that scenario, you're searching for the family that you want as opposed to browsing. So maybe it's just a mindset that we need to get more used to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we Emmett here he's just mentioned a search, adding like a sort of a better querying, like a search field essentially within that dropdown. And one thing I'd asked Zach Krohn when he was on sometime in about a year ago or so, probably already now, is I'd asked about keyboard shortcuts, and I was interested what you thought about that, or if it's just kind of that would be also unwieldy if they had built that functionality in.
You mean within Dynamo Player or Dynamo itself?
Yeah, just to know less. We've sort of sorted like queryability in terms of fast, like quickly getting to the actual thing you want, rather than searching through a list of 50 different get somethings that all have various permutations of the same thing. But I was speaking more like directly, like when you're in a model and you just want to like run a function, and for me, keyboard shortcuts were really are like a preference in a lot of different ways. And so I've been sort of trying to get to this myself, but I was hoping that maybe they could do it. So and sometimes they're definitely listening, but I was curious as to whether you thought being on the other side of the globe, halfway across the globe from us here, if that was something that you might use or your colleagues might use out there.
I mean, I don't tend to use shortcuts that much, but different people work in different ways, and that could be a good feature to add. Thinking about it a little bit more, I mean, you can browse to.
That's what I was wondering, is if you just throw stuff in different folders for different users, because this is going to be like a QA QC sort of management type thing, but I'm sure you have tons of other things. Yeah,
so exactly. I mean, if you could be, quite diligent with how you grouped scripts in folders, then hopefully it'd be easier to navigate, or maybe they could have some sort of shortcut up the top, sort of like switching between different Revit models or views. You could sort of pull down and tab between different folders, for example. I definitely think that would be useful. Sort of as an aside, one of the things you mentioned, sort of Zach from Autodesk. One of the things that I learned pretty recently through him was about element binding. So I don't know if people there are sort of familiar with how this works, but it confused the hell out of me at the beginning, where sometimes if you save the model or you don't save the model, they can sort of reset. And the way that Zach explained it to me was Dynamo Player is essentially the same as opening up Dynamo, running it, and closing it again without saving. So so an example of this would be, let's say adaptive components, and you run the script and it places a very large number of adaptive components. Now, if you're using Dynamo, it remembers, it has this element binding feature which remembers the elements that it's already placed. And I think Zach was saying that information is actually stored in Dynamo, not in Revit. So if you close down Dynamo and reopen it, that history is in the script. And if you rerun it with sort of different geometry, it's going to modify those adaptive components. It's not going to recreate it. Now, if you were to run that same script on another model, that history sort of, I believe, gets erased and it gets assigned now to the new model. So when you come back in and you run it on your original model, you're potentially going to get duplicate adaptive components rather than modified components. So I think that really needs, I couldn't find a lot of information about it, and I think that sort of inner workings need to be much more transparent, because there's nothing worse than preaching the values of the software, saying that this is all automated, and then Dynamo comes in and undoes or deletes any manual work that other team members have done. So, if you've got adaptive panels and people have come in and assigned materials or mark values or whatever that might be, if they're going to get overridden or modified, that's fine, but if they get deleted and recreated, it makes it really impossible for other team members to use. So for me, that's definitely, I would sort of like to see that feature explored or made transparent a lot more than maybe shortcuts in Dynamo.
Did we have a question here? Did you have a question? No? Okay.
Are these scripts available to download from the
Are the scripts available online? Is that?
Yes.
That's the question. Yeah, so I'll just quickly show you, if you're not familiar with it, you can't have Dynamo Player and Dynamo Open at the same time. That could be a nice feature too, that if they wanted to add, they could. But if you open up Dynamo and you go up here to packages, you have search for a package and manage packages. So if you search, there's a little bug here. You sort of need to wait for it to finish syncing before you start searching. And if you type BVN, you can download it here. The package has a bunch of nested or dependencies within that. So if you hit that, it'll install those for you. Clockwork, it uses, that's a fantastic package. Lunchbox, Springs, Steam nodes, all the usual suspects. The only issue you might have is some of those dependencies, when they're installed, they need to be uninstalled first. So it may say it can't install it, and you'll have to uninstall what you have and then download the BVN one, and it will install it plus all the dependencies. Alternatively, you can just go to the Dynamo BIM forum. Well, not the forum, but the package manager. And then you can just download that to your C drive and put it in the appropriate area, and it might save you a bit of hassle. So you can search in here once it's finished. And I should also point out that if you're after tutorials, you can go to parametricmonkey.com, and we have tutorials. We can filter by the software that you're using. So let's say, for example, Dynamo. And pretty much all of those custom nodes that were created will have their own tutorial. So, we see views to uppercase. We'll explain how to do it, which version it was sort of created in. And there's a whole bunch of other ones too that you might want to explore that we simply didn't have time for today. So renaming grids, you know, if you want to create view analysis, etc. Some of these are going to be redundant very soon, unfortunately, Flux. But yeah, definitely check it out, and you can always post a comment down the bottom, and I'll try to respond to you as soon as possible.
I noticed that it said deprecated on there in the package manager.
Sorry, can someone repeat that?
Sorry, I noticed it said deprecated in the package manager.
I can't hear that.
Sorry, I don't know. It said I noticed it said deprecated in the package manager.
Yes. So so when you search for the package, so yeah, it's been depreciated. You can still download it. And basically what we're in the process of doing is when I created this, I don't know, 3.5 years ago, I used my own personal email address. And one of the peculiarities and annoying things with Dynamo is that once it's published under that username or email address, you can't modify it. So you can log on to your Autodesk account and change your username, and that's fine. You know, that works with your subscription and your local alias. But if you try to upload and manage your package again, it'll say that you're not the current author and you need to switch. And the other feature which they sort of promised but they never enabled was multi-author of the packages. So you can imagine, you know, if you're a large company with offices around the world, unless you set up a, you know, info@office.com, then it becomes really hard for multiple people to sort of contribute to that. So that's definitely a feature that I would like to see. So yeah, coming back to the question is basically we're talking to Autodesk and we're trying to migrate this package to another username. So it's still available, and also I'll be releasing a new package probably in the next few months before the Built conference here in Australia. So sort of watch this space for sort of any sort of developments around that as well.
I have two random questions. Really quickly, one is, why do you prefer using model groups over assemblies? And second is, what are you most excited about here in the next 6 months to maybe get a peek at or start working on?
As in the next 6 months, like what's on my roadmap for script development?
Sure, or otherwise, generally speaking. Like, I don't know if you saw what Danny was presenting, but there are a whole lot of cool things that are kind of going on both locally and all over the place. So,
yep.
Generally, too, whichever you feel more comfortable.
So, in terms of your first question, this was the way that the team. I mean, I guess it's a preference. There may not be a right or wrong answer. Personally, I'm not that familiar with assemblies, and I think that is probably what comes down to a lot. I know there's been projects where they've tested a few different options. So one is sort of a linked model, where you do, maybe it's student accommodation, like a dorm room in one model, and it's just linked in with shared parameters multiple times. Model groups, which have its problems in terms of how walls join and flex. I've also seen people advocating families. So, it might be a 2D family or a column family that has, a lot of fake geometry in it. So yeah, I think ultimately there's no really good solution. And it would be nice once and for all to sort of, someone to say, this is it, this is the way forward. In terms of sort of the next... Sorry,
we had a question here.
Sorry to interrupt. Just, if you're not familiar with assemblies, as somebody who's done a little bit of residential, they're a terrible option. Specifically because unlike groups, assemblies, if you copy an assembly in multiple places like you do units, you can edit your assembly in one location and it will not update the others. Yeah, so it's a terrible option for units, which are supposed to be the same.
Yeah, but then you get automatic. That's why. So sorry. We can have this conversation offline, but I was just curious because I didn't know how. It seemed like that was pretty rectilinear building, and uniformly so. But with varying exterior topology, sometimes it can be helpful because the assembly can kind of take the different inputs and still remain the same assembly. Anyway, I agree. It's kind of a weedy thing. I was just curious.
Yep.
Sorry.
No problem. So I guess the second part of that question was around sort of the next 6 months. I think there's a lot of the utility scripts are sort of out there now, and I'm going to sort of probably move away from them, in that they exist, and basically as projects start to migrate into 2018, then we can over time start to persuade and encourage users to start to take advantage of this. I'm kind of more hesitant to push that too hard with Dynamo, because I think with some users you get one chance, and if it seems too complicated, then they can sort of check out and never come back. So the stuff that I'm looking at developing and starting to do it is around standards, and there's a lot of discussion, on Twitter and BIM forums and everywhere about standards, and there's different trains of thoughts. Coming out of the UK, there's all the PAS standards and BIM level 2, and there's a lot of tick box culture. We need to plan everything out. We need to have lockdown rules. We call a spade, and that's what it is. And my take on that is really that a lot of the time standards stifle innovation. So I'm all for consistency, but I also like the ability that at the beginning of a project, there's a discussion around what's the best way to do a project, rather than here is the BIM protocols that you must follow. And so you hear lots of comments around Kobe and single databases, and the list is endless. And if we look at CAD, for example, that was around for 20, 30 years, lots of people tried to get consistency between offices and countries around layer naming conventions and colors and pen weights. And in the end, people sort of just did what they want. They said, yeah, I'm a firm believer of standards, but you know, I have my own standard. So I'm looking at ways that you can quickly change standards or naming conventions. So examples of that could be around walls. You know, you might document it with a wall type 1. But, you know, potentially with Dynamo, you can extract all that information and we can rename it based on layer build-up, 10 mil gyprock, 90 mil stud, you know, blockwork, whatever. So as long as that information is stored in parameters, we can mix and match and sort of DJ however we like it. So if the client comes back to you and say, actually, you know, we need to change this, it's not the end of the world. We can sort of quickly go back and do it and look at being a bit more flexible in sort of how we document without losing any consistency.
Cool. Well, we don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, Danny. Oh, we got one more question. Sorry.
Hey, Paul, this is Emmett Cruey from Aerofits in San Francisco. You got two of my former colleagues over there at BVN, Shawnee and Matt Wash. I can't remember Shawnee's last name, but Finlayson. Are they taking pretty good care of those folks out there?
yeah. So Shawnee's in the office. She's really good. So he came from obviously a structural background. BVN is a architectural practice, so bringing in a different perspective on things. Matt, I think he's tuned into this webinar. He's out of the BVN Brisbane studio, and yeah, also with a structural background. So it's really interesting to see how different professionals use Dynamo differently. You know, architects, it's kind of rooms and doors, and structures as beams and columns, and different challenges around that. So no, it's great that they're here.
Thank you very much again. I know it's the middle of your business day, correct?
Yeah, it's lunchtime. Getting a bit grumpy, but that's okay. So yeah, no, thank you very much for having me, and it looks like you've got some great presentations ahead. So all the best.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, guys.
I can't do it from here. I'm going to do it from back.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We'll see you in maybe 3-4 weeks. Take pizza.
Oh yeah, it's helpful. Yeah, if you're ever having suggestions, I'm always looking for. Are you pressing a lot of the high Revit stuff? Okay, so the new idea, probably I mentioned this wrong. And then he fixed it, and then I got around back to this. I bet there was one thing I left in there, which was the fact that, okay, so I do a lot of stuff, and then I edit, customize everyone. Yeah, just one thing that's like you click on the view that you want, click on the other views that you want, and it matches everything to it, which is beautiful. Like you use it
Somebody just closed the door in the last like 10 minutes. Somebody just closed the door and it's locked, so I can't get in to stop the meeting. Because I can't stop it here, I don't think. We'll see if I can.